My name is Dave Mercer. For 15 years, I was the chief architect of a billion-dollar trading system that never failed, until nepotism destroyed everything I built. If you enjoy stories of corporate revenge and watching arrogance get crushed by reality, you'll want to hear what happened when my CEO replaced me with his completely unqualified son. This is how a family's greed brought down one of Wall Street's most successful firms. I built Everest Capital Holdings from nothing into something extraordinary. Not the company itself, that was CEO Howard Albright's vision, but the trading system that made him rich. Every line of code, every security protocol, every safeguard that moved billions through digital channels daily, that was mine. For 15 years, my system processed over $1.2 billion in trades without a single catastrophic failure. While competitors crashed during market volatility, while hackers brought down other firms, while the 2020 pandemic chaos destroyed trading platforms across Wall Street, Everest stood firm. That wasn't luck. That was engineering. From my corner office on the 45th floor of our Manhattan Tower, I watched the financial district bustling below, knowing I had built something unbreakable. Howard knew it too. At least, I thought he did. The first red flag appeared during our quarterly strategy meeting in January 2025. Howard was discussing long-term leadership development when he mentioned his son Kyle for the third time in 20 minutes. Kyle Albright was 29 years old with an MBA from Wharton that Daddy's connections had probably secured. He'd been floating around various departments for 6 months, asking questions with the confidence of someone who'd never earned his position. Kyle brings fresh perspectives, Howard said, his chest puffed with fatherly pride. The future belongs to innovative thinkers who aren't trapped by traditional methods. I exchanged glances with other senior staff. Fresh perspectives were valuable, but experience built billion-dollar systems. Kyle had never written a line of code, never stayed up all night fixing a critical bug, never felt the weight of knowing one mistake could cost millions. But he had something I didn't, the right last name. Over the next few weeks, Kyle started appearing at meetings I'd been running for years. He'd sit quietly, taking notes, occasionally asking questions that revealed his complete lack of technical understanding. "Why do we need so many backup systems?" he asked during one session. "Seems like we're overthinking this." I explained that redundancy prevented catastrophic failures, that regulatory compliance required multiple safeguards, that managing $1.2 billion demanded extreme caution. He nodded like he understood, but his eyes glazed over during technical explanations. Meanwhile, Howard watched these interactions with growing satisfaction, as if Kyle's ignorance was actually insight. I started hearing whispers from other department heads. Howard had been dropping hints about succession planning, about bringing new energy to leadership roles. The writing was appearing on the wall, and it spelled out a future I wasn't going to like. The axe fell on a Tuesday morning in March. "Dave, we need to talk," Howard said, closing his office door behind me. I'd been in that office countless times discussing system upgrades, crisis management, strategic expansions. This time felt different. His mahogany desk was cleaner than usual, and a manila folder sat prominently in the center. Never a good sign in corporate America. "The board and I have been discussing the future direction of our technology leadership," he began, avoiding direct eye contact. "We've decided it's time for a generational transition." I sat quietly, hands folded, waiting for the inevitable. 15 years had taught me that panic didn't fix problems, analysis did. "Kyle will be assuming your responsibilities effective immediately," Howard continued. "He brings innovative ideas and a vision that aligns with our future growth strategy." The irony was staggering. Kyle's innovative ideas consisted mainly of suggesting we make things more user-friendly and less complicated. Howard slid the manila folder across his desk. Inside was a severance package that would have made most people very happy: 6 months' salary, health insurance continuation, and a non-disclosure agreement with teeth. The money was generous, but guilt money usually is. "We'll need a comprehensive handoff over the next 2 weeks," Howard explained. "Documentation of all systems, transfer of access credentials, and training for Kyle's team." His team. Kyle already had a team, probably fresh graduates with computer science degrees and zero real-world experience. I opened the folder and reviewed the terms carefully. Everything looked standard and legal. "Will there be any technical support during the transition?" I asked, maintaining the professional tone that had served me well over the years. Howard finally met my eyes. Kyle is confident in his team's abilities. We want to give them space to implement their vision. Space to destroy everything I'd built, more likely. But I simply nodded and closed the folder. The next 2 weeks became the most methodical period of my career. While Howard probably expected me to rage or cause drama, I did the opposite. I arrived every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, wearing my best suits, greeting colleagues with professional courtesy. But beneath the surface, I was conducting the most thorough documentation project of my life. I cataloged every system component, every security protocol, every backup procedure that kept our billion-dollar operation running smoothly. More importantly, I began identifying what legally belonged to me versus what belonged to Everest Capital. The core system architecture stayed. That was company property. But the custom monitoring scripts I'd written during weekends, the specialized alert systems I developed using my own methodologies, the automated correction protocols I created during my personal time, those were different. Those were mine. I spent hours with Everest's legal team, ensuring every action I took was completely legitimate. I want to guarantee a smooth transition while protecting my intellectual contributions, I told them. They saw due diligence. I saw insurance. Kyle made his grand entrance on Thursday of my first week. He strutted into my office wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, carrying a leather briefcase, and that same arrogant smile I'd seen at company parties. "Dave, great to see you," he said, extending a hand with manicured nails. "Dad speaks so highly of your work. I'm really excited about taking things to the next level." I shook his hand and gestured to the chair across from my desk, where I'd assembled comprehensive documentation of our entire system. "I've prepared detailed guides covering all critical operations," I said, indicating the stack of binders. "We should start with the core architecture overview." For the next hour, I walked Kyle through the basics. His eyes lost focus when I explained database optimization. He nodded blankly during my overview of backup rotation schedules. When I began covering security authentication layers, he interrupted with characteristic confidence. "This all seems unnecessarily complicated," he said, waving dismissively. "Can't we just streamline everything? Technology should simplify business, not complicate it." I paused, choosing my response carefully. "The system handles over $1.2 billion in daily transactions. Complexity often equals security and reliability in financial systems." Kyle pulled out his iPhone and started scrolling. "But look at apps like Venmo or PayPal," he said. "They're simple and work perfectly fine." The comparison made my stomach twist. Comparing a mission-critical trading system to consumer payment apps was like comparing a NASA shuttle to a paper airplane. Both might fly, but one carries people safely through space. Regulatory requirements add necessary layers, I explained gently. SEC compliance, audit trails, fraud prevention. These create complexity for good reasons. Kyle was already checking social media, barely listening. Right. Well, I'm sure we can modernize all that outdated stuff." The team Kyle brought in was exactly what I'd feared. 3 recent graduates from prestigious universities, all under 26, all talking about disrupting financial technology and streamlining legacy systems. They treated our meeting like a college study session, casual and joking, completely missing that they were about to inherit control of over $1 billion in financial infrastructure. "So what happens if we just delete all this old code and start fresh?" asked Tyler, a kid who looked like he'd bought his first tie that morning. "You'd crash the entire system and potentially face federal criminal charges," I replied matter-of-factly. They laughed, thinking I was exaggerating. During my second week, I began the delicate process of removing my personal contributions. The custom monitoring scripts I'd written during weekends came with me. They were clearly my intellectual property, created on my own time. The specialized alert system I developed using my own methodologies was backed up to personal drives before being replaced with standard protocols. Most critically, I removed what I privately called my guardian angels. Automated correction scripts that had been quietly fixing small errors and preventing cascade failures for years. These weren't documented in any official manual because they were my personal additions, patches I'd created to address issues as they emerged. The system would function without them, but it would be vulnerable to exactly the kinds of problems I'd learned to prevent through hard experience. On my final Friday, I called one last meeting with Kyle and his team. I walked them through handoff procedures again, emphasizing critical backup schedules, monthly security audits, and the change management protocols that kept our system stable. There are a lot of bureaucratic rules, complained Madison, another team member. Can't we just trust our instincts and adapt as we go? Financial systems require methodical approaches, I explained patiently. One unauthorized change can create cascade effects throughout the entire network. Kyle checked his smartwatch during most of my explanation. Dave, I appreciate your thoroughness, but we've got this under control. My team is really innovative. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, right? I looked at him for a long moment. Just remember that in this case, those eggs represent $1.2 billion in client assets. He laughed. You worry too much, Dave. What's the worst that could happen? I cleaned out my office that afternoon, 15 years of career mementos fitting into 3 cardboard boxes. As I packed my final drawer, Kyle stopped by with that same confident grin. Dave, no hard feelings, okay? This is just business evolution. And who knows, maybe this change will benefit everyone involved. I closed my drawer and faced him directly. I hope you're right, Kyle. I genuinely hope you prove me wrong. Part of me actually meant it. Part of me hoped his confidence would somehow translate into competence, that his fresh perspective would improve what I'd built. But experience had taught me that hope and preparation weren't mutually exclusive. That weekend, I updated my LinkedIn profile and discreetly contacted my professional network. The financial technology world is smaller than most people realize, and word travels fast about available talent. By Monday, I had 3 interview requests. By Thursday, I had 2 serious job offers. One opportunity particularly caught my attention. Pinnacle Investment Group in Chicago wanted someone to design a completely new trading system from scratch. The salary was double what Everest had paid me. The signing bonus alone exceeded my previous annual compensation. I accepted the position but negotiated a start date 6 weeks out. Officially for personal time, but really because I suspected I might receive some interesting phone calls before then. I didn't have to wait long. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 11 days after leaving Everest. I was reviewing architectural plans for my new position when my phone rang. Howard Albright's name appeared on the caller ID. Dave, thank God you answered. His voice carried a strain I'd never heard before. We need your expertise. There's been an incident with the trading system. I set down my coffee and leaned back in my chair. What kind of incident, Howard? Some data inconsistencies. Kyle's team is handling it, but they wanted me to check if you might have insights into our backup procedures. Data inconsistencies. In financial systems, that phrase was like saying the Titanic experienced minor water intrusion. But I kept my voice neutral and professional. What specific inconsistencies are you seeing? It's technical stuff, Howard replied vaguely. Something about transaction logs not matching database records. Kyle says it's probably just a display error. A display error. Transaction logs not matching database records meant either data corruption or data loss. Neither was a simple display problem. Have they verified the integrity of your backup systems? I asked. I think so. Look, Dave, I know our separation was awkward, but could you just take a quick look? For old time's sake. Howard, I'm no longer an Everest employee. Any consulting work would require proper contracts and compensation arrangements. There was a telling pause. Of course. We can work something out legally. How quickly could you come in? I'm not available today. I could potentially consult later this week, depending on the terms we agree upon. We hung up with vague promises of working something out through proper channels. I knew Howard well enough to recognize panic beneath his controlled exterior. More importantly, I knew Kyle well enough to realize he'd never admit needing help from the man he'd replaced. Sure enough, my phone remained silent for the rest of that day. It rang the next morning at 6:43 a.m. Dave, it's Howard. We need you here immediately. Something major has gone wrong with the system. I sat up in bed. How wrong are we talking? We've lost approximately $4 million in transaction data from yesterday. It just disappeared completely. I was quiet for a moment, processing this information. $4 million in transactions don't simply vanish. Data doesn't delete itself spontaneously. Someone had made changes to the system without understanding the consequences. What modifications has Kyle's team made to the core architecture? I asked. They've been streamlining operations, removing redundant protocols, and updating some older code. Nothing major, really. Nothing major. I rubbed my temples, feeling a familiar headache building. Those redundant protocols were probably the safeguards I'd built to prevent exactly this kind of data loss. The older code they'd updated was likely foundational infrastructure that everything else depended on. Howard, I'll need complete logs of all system changes made since my departure, current access credentials, and a formal consulting agreement with liability protection. How long will arranging that paperwork take? At least 24 hours if you expedite everything through legal channels. 24 hours? Dave, we're bleeding money every minute this continues. The system is becoming increasingly unstable. Then you should have considered that before replacing your chief architect with an inexperienced team. The line went silent. Finally, Howard spoke, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Please, Dave, name your price. We're desperate. It's not about money, Howard. It's about doing this correctly and legally. I'll wait for the formal consulting agreement. That afternoon, I received a call from Jake Williams, my former second-in-command, who had somehow survived the management purge. Jake was a solid engineer whom I'd mentored over the years. Dave, I probably shouldn't be calling you directly, but I'm genuinely scared, he whispered. They're making changes without understanding basic system dependencies. Today alone, they disabled 3 critical security protocols and removed what they called legacy monitoring systems. Legacy monitoring systems. Those were my guardian angels, the automated scripts that caught and corrected problems before they became disasters. What's the current operational status, Jake? Transaction processing efficiency has dropped to about 65%. Error rates are climbing steadily. And Kyle keeps insisting it's normal growing pains from their modernization process. Are they following established change management protocols? Jake laughed bitterly. What change management protocols? They said those procedures were bureaucratic obstacles to innovation. They're making changes in real time, no testing environments, no rollback procedures. I felt ice run through my veins. Making untested changes to a live financial system was like performing surgery on a conscious patient without anesthesia, theoretically possible, but virtually guaranteed to end catastrophically. Jake, document everything you possibly can. Every change, every decision, every error message. Email copies to your personal account. Why should I do that? Because when this situation explodes, and it will explode, you don't want to be blamed for their mistakes. The next morning brought the call I'd been anticipating. Dave, we have a full crisis situation. Howard's voice was barely controlled panic. The system crashed completely at midnight. We've lost approximately $52 million in transaction data. $52 million. In 3 days, they'd escalated from losing $4 million to losing $52 million. The progression was exponential, meaning the underlying problems were accelerating rather than stabilizing. Where's Kyle right now? I asked. He's in emergency meetings with our board of directors. Dave, they're talking about involving federal regulators. The SEC is asking pointed questions. We need you here immediately. Have you prepared the consulting agreement we discussed? Yes. Everything's ready and waiting for signature. Just please come in as soon as possible. I arrived at Everest Capital at 1 p.m. that Thursday. The normally energetic office felt like a morgue. Employees huddled in small groups, whispering nervously. Several people from the IT department looked like they hadn't slept in days. Jake met me at the elevator bank. It's worse than I described on the phone, he said quietly as we walked toward what used to be my office. They didn't just disable your monitoring systems. They deleted them completely. And when the cascade failures started accelerating, they tried to fix everything by reverting to an old backup. My blood went cold. Which backup did they use? One from 4 months ago. I stopped walking. Reverting to a 4-month-old backup would erase months of transaction data, account updates, and system improvements. It was like trying to fix a broken leg by amputating it at the hip. Please tell me they didn't actually implement that revert. Jake's expression told me everything I needed to know. The main conference room was packed with people I recognized, board members, department heads, legal counsel, and several men in dark suits who had the unmistakable appearance of federal investigators. At the head of the table sat Kyle, his designer clothes now wrinkled, his confident smile replaced by something approaching raw panic. Howard stood when I entered. Everyone, this is Dave Mercer, our former chief architect. Dave has graciously agreed to help us resolve these current technical difficulties. Technical difficulties. The euphemism was almost impressive in its complete inadequacy. I took a seat and opened the laptop they'd provided. It took exactly 19 minutes to assess the full scope of the disaster. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, turning my screen toward the room, "you don't have technical difficulties. You have complete system failure that has compromised the integrity of your entire financial database." The silence was deafening. You could hear the air conditioning humming, someone's coffee cup being set down too hard, the distant sound of Manhattan traffic 45 floors below. Nobody spoke. Finally, one of the federal investigators leaned forward. "Mr. Mercer, can you quantify the extent of the damage?" I pulled up the diagnostic reports I'd run. Based on current system status, approximately $156 million in transaction data has been corrupted or lost entirely. The attempted restoration using outdated backups has created additional inconsistencies affecting roughly $420 million in account records. Kyle's face went white. $420 million? That can't be right. Tyler ran diagnostics this morning and said we were looking at maybe $30 million in affected accounts. I looked directly at him. Tyler's diagnostics measured account balances, not data integrity. Those are completely different things. The balances might appear correct on the surface, but the underlying transaction history that justifies those balances is gone. One of the board members, Helen Rodriguez, spoke up. "What does that mean in practical terms for our operations?" "It means when the SEC audits this company, and they will audit this company, you won't be able to provide the transaction trail, proving how money moved through your system." From a regulatory standpoint, $420 million has effectively vanished without a trace. Howard was gripping the conference table so hard his knuckles had turned white. "Can the situation be fixed?" I paused, considering my words carefully. The technical answer is possible, but it would require months of forensic reconstruction, assuming you can recover the deleted monitoring data. The practical answer is no, not within any time frame that would satisfy regulatory requirements. "But you built this entire system," Kyle said, his voice rising with desperation. "You must have some kind of master key or backdoor or override codes." The accusation hung heavy in the air. I could see where his mind was going. If the system failed this catastrophically right after I left, maybe I had sabotaged it on my way out. "Mr. Albright, everything I did during my tenure here was thoroughly documented and completely legal. This system failed because critical safeguards were removed and untested changes were implemented without proper procedures. This isn't sabotage, these are consequences." One of the investigators was taking detailed notes. "Mr. Mercer, did you remove any code or system components when you left the company?" "I removed personal intellectual property that I had developed during my own time, following legal review and company policy. I also documented all changes and provided comprehensive handoff materials." Jake, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "I can confirm that Dave left detailed documentation of everything. We ignored most of it because Kyle's team said the procedures were outdated and unnecessarily complex." All eyes turned to Kyle. His confident facade had completely crumbled, replaced by something resembling a deer caught in headlights. "We were trying to modernize the system," he said weakly. "The old architecture was complicated and inefficient. We thought we could streamline operations." "You thought you could streamline a system handling $1.2 billion in daily transactions without understanding how it actually worked?" The question came from Helen Rodriguez, and her tone could have frozen lava. "We hired consultants. We brought in external experts for guidance." "Which consultants?" Howard demanded. Kyle fumbled with his phone, pulling up what looked like email contacts. "NextGen Solutions. They specialize in financial system optimization and modernization." I had never heard of NextGen Solutions, but Jake was already shaking his head. NextGen is a web development company that builds marketing websites and mobile apps. I looked them up when Kyle first mentioned them. The room erupted into angry whispers. Board members leaned over to confer with their lawyers. The federal investigators exchanged meaningful looks. Howard looked like he was having a heart attack in slow motion. "How much did you pay these consultants?" Helen asked, her voice deadly quiet. $60,000 for the initial assessment and modernization recommendations," Kyle replied. So not only had they destroyed a functioning billion-dollar system, they had paid $60,000 to web developers to help them do it. The irony would have been hilarious if it wasn't so catastrophic. One of the investigators cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, in your professional opinion, what are the company's options at this point?" I closed my laptop and looked around the room. Legally, you need to immediately notify all affected clients and regulatory bodies about this data breach. Financially, you're looking at regulatory fines that could easily exceed the lost transaction amounts. Technically, you need to take the entire system offline until data integrity issues can be resolved. Taking the system offline means we can't process any transactions, Howard said desperately. That would shut down our entire business operation. Your entire operation is already compromised, I replied. The difference is that now you're aware of it. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Lawyers made frantic phone calls. Board members argued in hushed, angry tones. Kyle sat crying quietly in the corner while Howard tried to comfort him and simultaneously figure out how to save his company. I packed up my laptop and stood to leave. Helen Rodriguez intercepted me at the conference room door. "Dave, I want you to know that the board was only informed about the decision to replace you after it had already been finalized. That was Howard's unilateral decision, influenced by family considerations rather than business judgment." I nodded. "I understand the situation, Helen. Is there anything that can realistically be done? Any way to salvage this mess?" I thought carefully for a moment. You could rebuild from scratch with a completely new system. It would take approximately 18 months and cost around $75 million, assuming you can maintain your client base during the transition period. Her face fell. "And the chances of maintaining our client base after this disaster?" "Close to zero," I replied honestly. I left Everest Capital for the second and final time at 7:15 p.m. that Thursday evening. By Friday morning, the story had leaked to the Wall Street Journal. By the weekend, it was national news. Wall Street firm loses hundreds of millions due to nepotism and incompetence. The SEC investigation lasted 10 months. Everest was fined $547 million and forced to cease all operations. Howard resigned in disgrace and declared personal bankruptcy to avoid personal liability. Kyle never worked in the financial industry again. As for me, I started my new position at Pinnacle Investment Group in early May. The signing bonus alone exceeded what I had earned in 2 years at Everest. My new office overlooked Lake Michigan, and my new team treated me with the respect that comes from genuine appreciation of expertise rather than family connections. 6 months later, I received a LinkedIn message from Tyler, one of Kyle's former team members. He had taken a position at a small startup in Denver and wanted advice for someone trying to rebuild their reputation after a career setback. I replied with one sentence: "Learn the difference between confidence and competence." The system I built for Pinnacle went live in August 2025, 6 weeks ahead of schedule and under budget. It processes over $3 billion in transactions daily and has never experienced an unplanned outage. The difference between that system and what happened at Everest isn't just technical, it's cultural. At Pinnacle, experience is valued, procedures are followed, and nobody gets promoted based on their last name. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty about what happened to Everest Capital. The answer is straightforward. You can't feel guilty about the consequences that other people chose. I built them a system that worked flawlessly for 15 years. I documented everything properly and offered to help with the transition. They chose to ignore expertise in favor of nepotism, and they paid the price that such choices inevitably demand. The best revenge isn't plotting someone's downfall. It's building something so successful that their failure becomes irrelevant to your story. Today, I'm designing financial systems that will be running long after most people have forgotten Everest Capital ever existed. That's not revenge. That's simply moving forward with integrity intact. If you enjoyed this story of corporate karma, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.